Bittersweet strawberry marshmallow butterscotch, polar bear cashew, Dixieland frosted chocolate, light tutti frutti special raspberry, leave it to me. 3 grey scotch, last week's cherry smash, lemon freeze. I wanna go to Mars, where green rivers flow, and your sweet 16 is waiting for you after the show. I wanna go to Mars, we'll meet the gold dust rings tonight. You'll get your heart's desire, I will meet you under the lights. Golden champagne, juicy grapefruit, lucky Monday. High school football, high school football, Jolly Sunday. Almond caramel, frappe, pineapple, good day. Black and white, big apple, Henry Ford, sweet mild maple tea. I wanna go to Mars, where green rivers flow, and your sweet 16 is waiting for you after the show. I wanna go to Mars, we'll meet the gold dust rings tonight. You'll get your heart's desire, I will meet you under the lights. Sweet 16 is waiting for you after the show.
Welcome to the 2020 International AIDS Candlelight Memorial. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that tonight I am standing on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my heartfelt respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that the sovereignty of the land on which I stand was never ceded. I also acknowledge that tonight, as we gather to remember and honour the many lives lost to HIV/AIDS, we do so against the backdrop of ongoing loss and dispossession of this country's First Peoples. Good evening, my name is Nic Holas and I'm a person living with HIV. I also have the great honour of being your MC for Melbourne's 2020 International AIDS Candlelight Memorial. Tonight we're obviously doing things a little differently due to the coronavirus pandemic, but wherever you are this evening, I hope that you can feel the energy of our connection through your screens. We are still experiencing this together as we gather to honour the too many lives lost to HIV and AIDS. This event is hosted by Living Positive Victoria and Positive Women Victoria in partnership with Thorne Harbour Health. Tonight we have the honour of hearing from 3 extraordinary speakers, a keynote address from Dr. Jen Power from La Trobe University, as well as our positive speakers Julien, Fournier and Sarah Feagan. We'll also be treated to a musical performance from the low-res male choir.
The first Australian AIDS Candlelight Memorial was held in 1985, 2 years after the event was initiated in the United States. This first memorial involved just two people, Tom Carter, a nurse from the Melbourne Communicable Diseases Centre, and Phil Carswell, a long-time activist and founding member of the Victorian AIDS Council. These two men stood silently in a Melbourne city square holding their candles. Since this time, Melbourne City has hosted annual candlelight memorials, which over the years have involved tens of thousands of people. Candlelight memorials embody the emotion, the creativity and the performance that have always driven activist responses to HIV, internationally and in Australia. No one will ever forget the iconic slogans, the performances, the die-ins, the artwork. We have plenty such iconic images in Australia. We once saw activists abseiling into Federal Parliament House, while on the forecourt, orange flares were lit to signal emergency. We once saw the floral clock in Queen Victoria Gardens replaced by a graveyard of tiny crosses. The art of David McDiarmid, Peter Tully, and many others is unforgettable. And this is all captured in the novels and the memoirs of the time. Timothy Conograve's Holding the Man, David Menadue's Positive, John Foster's Take Me to Paris, Johnny, David Bradford's Tell Me I'm Okay. Like art, candlelight memorials are a unique form of political activism. They powerfully draw attention to the devastation caused by HIV and AIDS through the act of reading aloud the names of people who have died and through the show of solidarity in response to this. Candlelight memorials are also a forum for people to grieve. They create space to express grief publicly and for pain and loss to be acknowledged through the soulful act of a silent procession, through the ritual of lighting candles, and through gathering to listen. The public gathering to grieve is significant and vital in the context of the stigma which has always surrounded HIV and AIDS. Even today, stigma still marks many people's experience of living with HIV. And for many, stigmas also shape their experiences of grief and loss. In the early days, it was not uncommon for funerals to be straightened up, for AIDS to not be mentioned, and for the lovers and the friends of someone who had died to be kept away. Stigma and shame also meant people who had died from AIDS were often not publicly recognised or memorialised. The candlelight memorials were a show of resistance to these narratives of shame and secrecy. But their intention has never been just outward or with an eye to political ends. The purpose of candlelight memorials has always been to support community and to support people most affected by HIV. Public and collective recognition of grief can change someone's experience of loss and sadness, from feelings of loneliness or feeling illegitimate to feeling seen and being held. By softening people's experiences of shame or secrecy in their grief, AIDS candlelight memorials can operate in a similar way to the civil rights or the gay pride movements. They reinforce people's sense of their right to be respected and to be cared for, and they reinforce their willingness to fight for this. This isn't done through argument or political strategizing. It's done by supporting people and communities in extreme times and in times of loss and sadness. Candlelight memorials are ultimately about respectfully recognizing grief and loss while acknowledging and celebrating the power and spirit of community and activist responses to HIV. This year marks the 37th International Candlelight Memorial. Of course, the 2020 memorial will pass in very different circumstances to other years, with another pandemic preventing us from gathering. However, if anything, the response to COVID-19 is a reminder of how much we learned through HIV, how much we learned about caring for each other in the most extraordinary circumstances, how much we learned about the importance of partnership and the need to always watch for and challenge stigma, because of course lives and love go on even in times of crisis. Thank you.
See the stone set in your eyes, see the thorn twist in your side. I of nails she makes me wait, and I wait without you, with or without you, with or without you. Through the storm we reached the shore, you gave it all, but I want more, and I'm waiting for you, with or without you, with or without you. And you give yourself away, and you give yourself away, and you give, and you give yourself away. My hands are tied, my body's bruised, she's got me with nothing to win.
It's impossible to be recording myself emceeing tonight's event without reflecting on this current pandemic. I hope you're all safe and well and not too affected by coronavirus's impact on our society. Many comparisons have been made between HIV and AIDS and coronavirus COVID-19. Both have sparked mass panics, both have taken loved ones away from families, and both have led to an increase in the policing of vulnerable communities. In many ways, though, COVID-19 is nothing like HIV/AIDS. Not just how the virus itself is spread, but also it's nothing like when compared to how quickly governments around the world have responded to this crisis. But this era we find ourselves in also brings up the trauma many have experienced during the very worst days of the HIV/AIDS crisis. For some, that's a trauma that's never gone away. For others, they might have perhaps assumed that it had dissipated and have been surprised by the reaction to the current pandemic. Wherever you are, I hope you know that there are services and support available to you. Tonight is an opportunity to pause, to come together to remember the thousands of lives lost to HIV and AIDS in Australia and the millions of lives lost around the world. I'm particularly struck by this year's theme on the shoulders of giants. That's because, as a person living with HIV who was born the same year the first Australian AIDS diagnosis occurred, I wasn't there for the worst days of our AIDS crisis. I've come to this community years later. I was in high school when combination therapies became available. When the Swiss statement was published, I was a young gay man living in Melbourne, still HIV negative. So when I did become HIV positive, I had a lot of history to learn, despite being part of the queer community for many years. I think there's a myth that you often hear when you are of the generation or period in time that missed the worst days of the crisis, that we don't know what it was like, that we don't know our history. In my experience though, those more recently diagnosed with HIV are hungry for knowledge. As soon as you become HIV positive, you quickly realize just how much has gone before you. For you to be here, standing, healthy, able to access treatment, able to fully love your partners, have children, and hold your head up high and live openly as an HIV positive person. None of these remarkable achievements would have been possible without the sacrifice of those who went before us. They are the giants upon whose shoulders we stand. Many, thankfully, are still with us, but of course, sadly, many did not make it to today. They're no longer with us in person, but they're with us always, in the memories of those who knew them and loved them, on the dance floors and dining tables, in the faces of children who bear their likeness, and in the hands that they used to hold. But they are also with us in other ways. In the daily treatments I take and the PrEP my boyfriend takes, they are there. They put their bodies on the line for medical trials in an era where no direct benefit to them was ever on the cards, but they persevered so that one day those who came after them might live in an era where fear could be retired. And that day is now. They are with us, these giants, in the words we have for ourselves. They are stitched into anti-discrimination laws, into patient-first policies. They are with us every time we get a seat at the table, a seat that they fought so hard for. It's only by standing on the shoulders of these giants that we can see, somewhere in the distant horizon, an end to all of this. We can see where we must go to reach that destination, and we bring them with us, these giants, and we never forget them. Tonight is a chance to bring them to the very front of our minds, to warm our memories of them with the light of our candles. So wherever you are tonight, hold your candle high and remember them, to the giants.
Hi everyone, my name is Julien. I'm a positive speaker for Living Positive Victoria. So you have noticed already that I have an accent. Yes, I am an immigrant. I am French. I came to Australia 6 years ago. I'm not even really sure why. I guess I was just hungry for adventure, and back then I applied for a working holiday visa, prepared for my trip for a few months, and a couple of months before leaving Paris I did an STI checkup. I actually thought I was going to be fine, that it was just going to be a routine check, but the doctor came back with the news that I had tested positive for HIV. So you can only imagine the shock that it was, and also the situation I found myself in. Should I go to the other side of the planet without even knowing how to live with HIV, or should I stay in Europe? I hesitated for a minute, and then I thought, no, I will not let the virus take over my life. And so I came. I knew that coming to Australia was not going to be easy, especially because the working holiday visa did not grant me access to Medicare, and HIV medication is extremely expensive. It can go from a few $100s a month to several thousands. I'm lucky because as a Frenchman, I could get France to cover me abroad, so even though I still had to pay a fairly significant contribution, my medication was covered 100% by the French healthcare system. So I came here thinking about living by the beach, under the sun, but somehow I elected to live in Melbourne. Could have chosen Sydney or Brisbane, but no, Melbourne. Eventually, I found a job as a web developer, and I got sponsored for a temporary business visa, the 457 visa. When I applied for that visa, I had to disclose my status. The reason for that is that the federal government does not want to have to bear the cost of the medication, even though, again, the 457 visa does not grant access to Medicare anyway. So I had to ask for a 2-year visa only, instead of 4 years, in order to be under a specific threshold, and 2 years later, I applied for another 457 visa. Each time they asked me to do a HIV test, just in case the second time the test comes back negative, maybe. In those 6 years that I spent here in Australia, I have done a number of things. First of all, I have made important friends. I have traveled around. I've also started doing stand-up comedy, but I'm still trying to figure out how to integrate HIV jokes into my routines. But yeah, I'm not there yet. And most of all, during those 6 years here in Australia, I have learned how to live with the virus, how to remember to take my medication every day, how to disclose my status to my partners, how not to freak them out, and how not to freak out myself when I have a cut, for example. Again, I consider myself lucky because my treatment is efficient and I am undetectable. So undetectable means that the virus is at such a low level in my body that I cannot pass it on. It is also a really good feeling to know that my viral load is under control. One of my biggest fears is to pass the virus on to someone else, but thanks to the treatment, this cannot happen. When I arrived in Melbourne, I registered at the Green Room at Melbourne Sexual Health, which is free for everyone. Back in the day, I didn't have a job, so it was great to be able to be followed and tested for free there. It is also important to do our best to make sure HIV care and facilities are accessible to everyone who requires it. It goes for the immigrants, it goes for the unemployed, it goes for rural communities, it goes for indigenous communities, it goes for gay men, it goes for straight men, it goes for women, it goes for everyone. We have to keep in mind that the virus does not discriminate and that a person living with HIV who receives appropriate care is a person who is likely to suppress their viral load and therefore is unlikely to pass on the virus. At the Green Room, I was told about the Phoenix workshop run by Living Positive Victoria. It's a 2-day module during which people newly diagnosed with HIV get information about their condition and about resources available in Victoria. That's where I heard of the Positive Speakers Bureau for the first time. It eventually became obvious to me that I should enroll to become a positive speaker myself. In the process, I decided to disclose my HIV status to my family. I first told my sisters, who reacted really well, and then I told my parents, who did not take it so well. With my parents, I expected a negative reaction because they still had a problem with me being gay in the first place. And when I told them I had the virus, as expected, I heard a series of cliches and stereotypes, which were neither true nor fair. In fact, my parents' reaction was probably the strongest stigma I have ever received. Tried to make it as easy for them as possible, but it did not work. So we stopped speaking after that, as I couldn't accept their reaction. So after this failure with my parents, I could have backed off, right? I could have decided maybe this whole thing was not a good idea, but somehow it just reaffirmed my commitment to HIV advocacy. It convinced me even more that I had to get out there and speak to people to fight stigma so that other people who would get diagnosed with HIV don't go through that. So I have been a positive speaker for about 4 years now, and I have given quite a few talks. I have the feeling that I have managed to make people living with HIV less fearsome to the rest of the population just by going out there and telling my story. So far I have given a few talks in schools, to medical staff, and to gay groups. So it's quite a diverse array of people. Besides that, I also did that walk going from Portland, Victoria to Penola in South Australia. A walk of 180 kilometers during 8 days with other people living with HIV in order to show the world that you can have HIV and still achieve things. It was hard, but hey, at least I lost weight. So yeah, it was worth it. And you know, maybe the whole world didn't hear about us, but we were in the newspaper in rural towns, on regional TV. So I hope we have reached an audience that doesn't necessarily get to hear about HIV. I do my bit for fighting stigma, and fighting stigma is not just for the well-being of people living with HIV, even though it's important. It's also a way to fight the epidemic. We know that some people are reluctant to get tested because they are afraid of discovering they are positive and of being stigmatized. By fighting stigma, we make these people less scared of getting tested and therefore more likely to get treated, and ultimately less likely to suffer from the virus and less likely to transmit it. The message needs to be clear that HIV is not a punishment or a statement on your lifestyle, it's a medical condition. So, a year ago, I received a call from my mother, who told me she missed me and she apologized for what she had said 3 years ago. So now we are talking again, it's good. Taking it easy. It's good to remember where we come from. From being a lethal condition, HIV is now manageable. 30 years ago, living positive Victoria had just been born. HIV was perceived as a death sentence. And again, I feel very lucky that I was born in this day and age where there is medication that allows me to keep living and exploring the world, even though it's a bit difficult these days with COVID-19, a world where there is PrEP as well. With PrEP, HIV negative people can take a pill that prevents them from getting HIV, so that reduces the fear. Today it feels like we have all the tools to end the HIV epidemic, and maybe one day there will even be a cure, and I hope so, but I know I don't need a cure to live on. Thank you very much.
Hello to you all out there. I hope you're staying safe, caring for yourself, looking after yourself and your community and neighbours. I feel so grateful to be able to be here tonight on this very special AIDS Candlelight Memorial Vigil, COVID-19 edition 2020. So, my journey after my own HIV diagnosis was explosive. It was destructive, and I'm sure it had its own weather system at times. I was on a path to nowhere, but that changed. It changed because of you, because of the HIV community. It changed because of people that we are remembering here today, not just in Melbourne, but all over the world. It changed because of warriors standing beside me, behind me, all around me, to make sure that my path was set right again, my giants. I feel in our community we do a lot of things exceptionally well. We are selfless, we volunteer, we advocate, and most of the time without pay. When there were no treatments, our community laid their bodies on the line so we can now live and love. Thank you. Now, one of our biggest fights is stigma, and just the other week I saw 6 brave community members from Australia stand up and put their face on national TV, sharing their stories to combat stigma. It was amazing. Personally, I've had a lot of people sit with me in my good, my best and my worst of days. They taught me how to write applications and introduced me to other leaders, encouraged me to stand for boards that I never thought I could, and get me into workshops and completing them, some that I now facilitate. My growth since 2008 has been radical. I now stand in a position to help and build the capacity of the community and help people through their good and bad times and sit with them as I was sat with. But my guides that got me to where I am are still there with me. Some spiritually, some just a phone call away. So I'm still not doing this alone. I've made it my ritual to attend the AIDS Candlelight Memorial every year since my diagnosis in 2018. My parents are usually right beside me, feeling so grateful that they're there, not remembering me, but they're with me. But of course this year is different because of physical distancing. Through this time of physical isolation, I've been reflecting a lot about the intersections between COVID-19 and the AIDS epidemic all those years ago. COVID-19 is indiscriminate and more easily spread, yet there are commonalities with HIV. Fear of infection, the stigmatization of people deemed to be responsible for the spread of the virus. I guess the big difference that we face with this novel virus is that we're unable to hold each other close. And that's hard for many of us. I know that it's hard for me. So in 2020, when I look back to all those we have loved, that we have lost on the way, I hope that I'm doing them proud and doing you proud. That the fight is not over to end stigma, that equitable treatment access for all will be something that will be realised, and that HIV criminalisation will not be tolerated. This Candlelight Memorial, I hope that you're at home, you've got a candle burning, I've got mine here if you can see it, and that you're remembering the past, that you're in the present and you're looking forward to tomorrow. Know you are not alone today, and you're a part of a community that will always hold you, even if we cannot physically, during this time. Thank you so much, and I hope this memorial is beautiful and meaningful to you as always. Thank you.
You shouted out, but I can't hear a word you say. I'm talking loud, not saying much. I'm criticized, but all your bullets ricochet. You shoot me down, but I get up. I'm bulletproof, nothing to lose. Far away, ricochet. You take your aim. Far away, you shoot me down, but I will fall. I am titanium. You shoot me down, but I won't fall. I am titanium. Cut me down, but it's you who have further to fall. Ghost town, haunted love. Raise your voice. Sticks and stones may break my bones. I'm talking loud, not saying much. I'm bulletproof, nothing to lose. Far away, ricochet. You take your aim. Far away, you shoot me down, but I won't fall. I am titanium. You shoot me down, but I won't fall. I am titanium. I am titanium. I am titanium. Stone hard, machine gun, firing at the ones who run. You shoot me down, but I will fall. I'm titanium. You shoot me down, but I will fall. I am titanium.
Well, that brings us to a close for this evening's event. Thank you to our speakers, Dr. Jen Powell from La Trobe University, Julien Fournier and Sarah Feagan from the Positive Speakers Bureau. Thank you also to the Low Res Male Choir and to our hosts Living Positive Victoria and Positive Women Victoria and our event partner Thorne Harbour Health. While it's a shame that we cannot be together in the same place to unite in honouring those lost to HIV and AIDS, in many ways tonight's format speaks to some of the aspects of our community that I hold dear and try to remember often. Firstly, we are resilient. We adapt to challenges placed in our way and we find ways to stay connected and keep connected. And of course, we are always carrying those we've lost with us, no matter where we are. So again, hold that candle up and remember them. To the Giants, we remember you.